Welcome to Blackbriar Gaming. In preparation for the new edition of Horus Heresy, Warhammer Community are going legion by legion, teasing us with rule snippets from the upcoming release. Today, we'll be looking at the 8th Legion, the infamous Night Lords. Just a quick note before we get into it, as we're a new channel, a subscribe and a like really helps us reach a bigger audience. So if you enjoyed the video, please hit those buttons down below. The Night Lords, what a pack of psychopaths. I have a soft place in my heart for the Night Lords. I love the villain, I love playing the villain, and the Night Lords is just perfection when it comes to playing just a really evil faction. They do suffer a bit from the, stereotype of the villain. Most legions, Sons of Horus, Emperor's Children, for example, have these redeeming features, or at least they did before the Heresy came along. And sure, they were full of a bunch of killers, but you know they were doing good things as well. The Night Lords, not so much, and that can either make them appealing to some people or make them a bit one-dimensional for some people. And I totally get that. The reason I really like them is that they just don't play by the other legions' rules. They've got their own idea on warfare, their own idea how to achieve things, and they're going about. They've got a mandate from the Emperor, really, to sow fear. Let's be honest, he designed these guys for a reason. Their initial recruitment intake was from a bunch of kids out of prisons from the areas he was conquering on Terra. And of course, he created Kurz the way he was. And, you know, nature versus nurture. But in the end, Kurz is an absolute psychopath. He's got these wonderful Batman vibes. He's all about vengeance and punishing people and just murdering his way across the galaxy. And it's kind of great. Other reasons why I really like them is the lightning detail on them just looks so cool. Who can not love that? Now, you don't have to do this when you're creating your Heresy army. It can be a bit of a pain, but I love the way the lightning looks, especially across vehicles as well. It can look really cool. The last reason why they really appeal to me is the Primarch himself, because they based him off, for those movie fans out there, they based him off Colonel Kurtz from Apocalypse Now, who was played by Marlon Brando, and the whole idea was just he was a rogue colonel that just slowly slipped into madness, and the US Army had to go and assassinate him to get rid of him. It's just the movie's fantastic. It's one of my favorite, and the way they've resembled this in 40k form, it's just poetry in a 30k bubble. So big fan of the Night Lords. What were they up to? Now, before the Heresy, they were off massacring their way across the galaxy. Kurz was doing terrible things, both to his own planet, and I won't go into that. You can read up on that if you want to, but to many different planets across the galaxy and populations that had the unfortunate instance of being brought to compliance by the Night Lords. So when the Heresy dropped, of course, Kurz was very much going to turn traitor right from the start. No one's shocked by that. What did he get up to? So during the Heresy, one of the big things the Night Lords did was the Thramis campaign against the Dark Angels. So to keep the Dark Angels busy out on the edges of the galaxy. Really cool campaign. It's an absolute great read to get into it with the Black Books. They were brutal to each other and just absolutely punishing each other. And the depth of bitterness between those two legions is really wonderful. In the end, the Dark Angels capture Kurz, he's kind of running loose around one of their ships, but they know that he's in there, and they take him away. Now, the Legion itself, the Night Lords, they don't really despair at this because they know how horrible Kurz is, and they're so horrible themselves that this idea of loyalty isn't really huge for them, which I like as well. Loyalty is just this theme throughout all the legions that gets repeated and repeated, and the Night Lord's like, no, I'm in this for myself, every single one of them, and it's great. So they splintered into these smaller bands that then scattered across the galaxy to continue just the campaign of terror. Both at the siege themselves, when everyone else was busy perpetrating the siege, the Night Lords were kind of cruising around Terra and murdering, slaughtering, and skinning people all over the place. And they were doing that in the wider piece across the galaxy throughout the Heresy. So Night Lords, really cool theme, really cool idea, very unique as the Legion goes. Enjoy them. One day we'll get to an army of them. Very excited for it. But the rules for them, right? So traditionally in Heresy 1.0, the Night Lords were a bit flat. They weren't fantastic against other legions in particular. They kind of hit against a brick wall, and their units didn't seem designed to really take on other legions in a meaningful or interesting way. Against basic humans, they could slaughter away like there was no tomorrow, but that's not what the majority of the games for Heresy were. So let's have a look at the rules that the Warhammer Community website has given us. They've given us 3 pieces today. We've got an army-wide special rule, we've got some weapons, and we've got a Warlord trait. So let's start off with their special rule, a talent for murder. The army-wide special rule reads, when a unit made up entirely of models with this special rule attacks during the fight subphase or makes a shooting attack against an enemy unit that is pinned, falling back, or outnumbered by the attacking unit, it gains a bonus of +1 to all to wound or armor penetration rolls made during the shooting attack or assault. When determining if a unit is outnumbered, models with the bulky special rule count as the number of models equal to the value, and models with the vehicle unit type count as 10 models. Okay, that's a making it brief, a little more brief there. Lots to read. So, essentially, yesterday I was talking about how the Imperial Fist rules and just the Horus Heresy rules in general that we've seen so far are quite well written. They're quite deliberate. They're quite specific. Well, I kind of take it back now. This is the first rule I've seen that is a bit iffy. It's a bit awkward. And the awkward piece here revolves around that fight subphase or makes a shooting attack piece at the start of this rule. So, my interpretation... rules as written versus rules as intended. So as I see it, the rules as written are that you always get your +1 to wound in the fight subphase, even if you don't outnumber them. But when it comes to, or if they're not pinned or falling back, obviously if they're pinned or falling back, doesn't apply in the fight subphase. Or in the shooting attack, you only get the +1 to wound if they're pinned, shooting back, or outnumbered. So to reiterate, if you're in combat with Night Lords and someone else, rules as written, you always get that +1 to wound, but in the shooting attack, you only get the +1 to wound if you're outnumbered. Now, I don't think that's how the rules are intended. I believe in the fight subphase, to get that +1 to wound, you still need to be outnumbering them, but it's not that well written. In regards to how the rule's designed, I don't love it. It's not as powerful as some of the other ones we've seen, especially... In regards to the outnumbering piece for vehicles, I just don't know why they've even included it. By the time you're getting into assault with a vehicle, you're likely not going to outnumber it. And furthermore, if you're shooting at a vehicle, it's very likely you don't outnumber it. So who's like your vehicle yourself? Let's say you're shooting at a vehicle with another vehicle, and you've got this special rule. You might not even be able to, but let's say you can. You're both going to be counting as 10 models, so you're never going to outnumber with another vehicle. Maybe if you have a squadron of vehicles, they can get the +1 to armor penetration, now that I'm thinking about it. But your heavy support squads, for instance, let's say you've got a bunch of guys armed with las cannons and missiles, you're not going to have more than 10 of them in a unit, definitely, so that's never really going to come into it. So I don't love that part. I would have had the vehicle units maybe count as 5 instead of 10. When it comes to the fight piece, if you do indeed need to outnumber your enemy in the fight subphase, then I don't love it either. If you've got assault-orientated units and they're charging across the board, they're probably going to take some casualties going in. And if you have set up your army for assault, you're probably not going to outnumber your opponent when you get in there. You really have to design your army around this, around having really big units. Hope your opponent kind of doesn't have the same. You have to be very tactical in what units you then attack if you want to gain advantage from this. And I don't hate that, right? There's a lot of decision points here and a lot of nuance around army building and the way you fight your battles, which I like. But I just don't think this rule is going to come into effect that often. And even when it does, maybe won't be that impactful. We'll have to wait and see. I could be wrong. It might be really good, and I'm just not interpreting it well. We'll wait and see. But overall, not overly impressed with it. I like the idea, the lore of it, and the narrative is really nice because they are all about just stabbing people in the back, right? Swamping them, getting some shivs in there while your other legionary that you're fighting isn't looking, cornering them, all that kind of stuff. So narrative-wise, the rule's really good. But the way it's written and the way it works on the table, not that impressed on it. But let's move on. Something I do like about these rules are the chain weapons that we've got here. So the chain blade, the chain glaive, and the headsman axe. Now, the way you can use these in your army as per the playtest rules, so this might change, please don't quote me on it, but the way it works now is essentially if a character can take a power weapon, then it can replace them for these kind of weapons. And then when you're looking at the majority of the Night Lord special units, they can, for extra points, take chain blades, chain glaives, etc. So you can get a bunch of these in your army if you choose to, and you choose to model your army that way, noting that getting your hands on these isn't overly easy, depending on which units you're buying and how you're going about it. So a bit of Forge World resin has to be bought to kit out your army. But essentially you can pack a bunch of these weapons into your army, and they are really powerful. So you've got the Chainblade. Let's use the Chainblade as an example when comparing it to a power weapon. So you get the +1 strength right from the start. Fantastic. Power weapons don't get that. You've got this breaching 6+. Now what that means is if you roll a 6 to wound, I believe, the weapon now counts as AP2. That's really nice. And then you've got Shred, which is just re-rolling to wound, which is wild. Re-rolling to wound on an AP3 weapon is awesome. I believe in the new edition, chain swords, so your basic close combat weapon for a Legiones Astartes, is the chain swords are going to have Shred, which is really nice, but they don't have AP3. Meanwhile, the power weapons have AP3, but don't have Shred. So getting the best of both worlds in this Chainblade is really nice. I think it's a super powerful weapon. If I were a Night Lord player, I would be including a lot of these in my army. The Chain Glaive, look, it's also nice. It's that extra pip of strength, but you're losing an attack because it's two-handed. So probably the Chainblade would be my more go-to. More excited about that. So yeah, look, keen. Love the rule. They're going to work really well. They've given them a bunch of special rules for these weapons that I think will make them super popular for Night Lords players. Last up, we've got the Warlord trait. So the Warlord trait is Flaymaster. What a great name. The Warlord trait reads, a Warlord with this trait gains the Fear 1 special rule, and each time that Warlord is part of the combat, that results in all enemy units being destroyed by having all their models removed as casualties or as part of a sweeping advance, or that is part of a challenge in which the enemy combatant is removed as a casualty. It increases the value of that special rule by +1 up to a maximum of Fear 3. In addition, an army whose Warlord trait has this trait may make an additional reaction during the opposing player's assault phase, which is interesting. So most of these Warlord traits that we've seen so far have been extra reactions during the enemy's movement phase. This is assault phase, which I like a lot more than the movement phase, because the main reaction you're going to be doing during your opposing player's assault phase is Overwatch. So shooting at them while they're charging in. Being able to do multiple Overwatches in a single turn, I think is really powerful, because usually you'd only be able to do one. So if the opponent is clever, they're going to be charging in multiple units across the table, 3 or 4, let's say, to make sure that you don't get the full advantage of Overwatch. Being able to get more Overwatch, really nice. And kind of fitting for the Night Lords as well. I dare say the Night Lords, their advanced reaction might be something around a counter charge. We'll have to wait and see, but love that piece. The first part of the rule, let's talk about that, because that is insane. So Fear in the new edition, playtest here, so bear with me. It looks like Fear is going to be lowering the leadership of your opponent in a 12-inch bubble around the character that has it, or the unit that has it, whatever that looks like. That bubble is huge. Now, there are some conditions there. If a unit is locked in assault with a unit that isn't giving them fear, then that fear will drop off because they're more worried about guys lopping off their heads in the combat that they're in. But for the most part, your Warlord is giving this fear bubble, this -1 to start, to enemy leadership, 12 inches around them. Giant. So you drop one of these characters with fear on them in the middle of your opponent's army in the movement phase. Let's say you deep strike them in because these guys have got jetpacks all over the place. Then you start shooting them off the board, because Fear 1, not that big a deal. Fear 3 is intense. That's taking your basic squad of Legiones Astartes down from leadership 8 or 9 down to leadership 5 or 6. Suddenly they're failing their morale checks half the time, if not more, and running off the board or getting pinned, depending on what you're doing to them. You're really shutting your opponent's army down with this rule, if you combine it with some clever play and a bit of shooting. Going up to Fear 3 doesn't look like it's that hard to achieve. You just have to, essentially, you kill one character in a challenge, you then win that assault and wipe out that unit. You've already gone up 2 in one assault. So this is, and then you're up to Fear 3. Right? You're up there in one assault if you achieve a challenge and you wipe out the unit. So you get there quickly. Suddenly you're just huge negatives to your opponent's leadership. Really like it. I think it's going to be extremely powerful. And for this reason, I think Night Lords, even though their special rule is a bit meh, their army-wide one that we saw up above, the fear mechanic, if the Night Lords do have a monopoly on it, and they may do because it's kind of their thing, if this is what the Night Lord's all about, and we see it with a bunch of their units and a bunch of their characters, I think it's going to be a really powerful mechanic, and Night Lords are going to absolutely rock it on the table against certain armies. Notably, fear doesn't stack, so if you have 2 characters producing fear, a unit only has to worry about one of them, not both. You can't go, -6 to someone's leadership. That'd be outrageous. So that is the Night Lords. Pretty cool rules. Their army-wide special rule, not so impressive, but their weapons that they get, and then this Flame Master rule, and just the idea around the fear mechanic, and the way we're going to see that from, no doubt, multiple units within the Night Lord army, I think is super powerful. So that brings us to the end of our Heresy chats for today. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the Night Lord's rules in the comments. Make sure to keep rolling those dice and getting hyped for Heresy.